What's up? It's Ryan and CJ. And
Oh my gosh, that has to go in the YouTube. That was good. We have to open it like that. Was perfect.
What's up, guys? It's Ryan, CJ, and Bailey back with Weightlifting Way of Life podcast. Thanks for tuning in again. We got an awesome show for you. Today we're going to talk about the programming idea behind how to be a better CrossFitter and what that process looks like, and a lot of the debate that goes on in the programming world on what CrossFit has done. So if you don't mind, CJ, could you lead us off?
Sure.
You always look at me like I'm stupid.
No, why? I didn't know. I'm always. I'm sorry.
That's the way he
I guess it's just the way I look. I never mean that.
look.
I never mean that. I'm sorry.
Rusty face.
So, hey guys, so we're talking about periodization and programming and how to implement it with CrossFit athletes, specifically right now for the off season. Off-season training is a very interesting time, especially in CrossFit, because technically it's, for most people, 11 months long, or like 9 months, and which is much longer than your traditional off-season for other sports. CrossFit has been able to, in my eyes, kind of change the way that we view programming and how we can focus on two different aspects of strength training or of conditioning at the same time. So we're going to open up with talking about what's called the periodization triangle. So hopefully you guys can see this. Basically, the triangle yields something like this. I actually don't know if it's called the periodization triangle, but that's what I learned it as.
That's close enough.
I think so. So we have endurance. All right.
Which is your ability to do a lot of things over a lot of time.
Right. So kind of CrossFitty, right? CrossFitty-fitty.
Right.
That's what we said, CrossFitty-fitty. And so we have power, speed, right? Power, speed.
Your ability to put out a high degree of force over a much smaller domain of time.
Right. So maybe aerobic, anaerobic. And then we have strength.
Which is similar to power, but it's going to be a maximal output in a incredibly small period of time.
Right. So theory shows that basically you can only prioritize one portion of the triangle. That's what periodization talks about, right? Different parts of the season, you will begin to focus, right? So, Ryan, if you talk about how we look at, everyone kind of compares periodization to football, because football is the only true sport that is, it's probably the easiest to program for, because it's the same exact schedule every year, it never changes. They play 1 day a week, and it's all the same time. So, kind of talk about like what off-season, what preseason, and in-season, and maybe, postseason. Right?
Sure.
Do we have a postseason still?
Yeah.
Kind of what it looks like, kind of based on this and how you view it.
So with most of your Western style linear periodization models,
What does that mean?
That's your probably most common style of programming. That's going to be very phasic, meaning there's going to be parts of the year you're focusing on one thing, other parts of the year you're going to focus on something else. You're going to let those other pieces kind of die while you're working on one. This goes a little bit beyond sort of this model here. If we were going to write a linear periodization style model for, say, a football team, you may want to spend part of your off season, probably your spring, like right now, focusing on hypertrophy, so trying to build a little size. You may want to spend part of your summer with a lot of injury prevention, with building in your power and your speed. Your endurance is just going to be probably right after the season and probably right before the season. Unpopular opinion, you can't build conditioning for football. Only football can build conditioning for football.
Ooh, that's an interesting statement.
Yeah. And
I've never heard that before.
And strength is probably going to be more of your summer period. So it really, honestly, is very much on the programmer, without getting too much into how I see it personally. But it's very much on the programmer on how you're going to break that up. But to back up, a normal linear Western periodization model is saying, I'm going to focus on this for this piece of time, and I'm going to focus on this for this piece of time. If we're looking at the periodization triangle, we may say, I'm focusing on power and speed for 3 months, then I'm going to focus on endurance for 3 months, and then we're going to focus on strength for 3 months, maybe having some minor overlap in between those. That's going to be your normal model.
Okay, cool, very good. So Bailey, you're in school right now, yes?
Yeah.
What you're taking a class on programming and strength and conditioning, right? What's
Yeah.
What's the class called?
Phys basis.
What is that? Well, that's a shortened name. What's the
Yeah.
actual name of the class? Do you even know?
I actually don't. Physiological basis of strength and development.
In conditioning.
I don't think that's in there.
Oh, is it not strength and conditioning?
I think it's just strength
Oh,
development.
They took it out.
changed
They
it.
didn't have time for the conditioning part.
No,
guess not.
actually, we had one lecture over aerobic training, and
Nice.
it lasted less than 30 minutes.
Cool. Okay, so can you kind of tell me about that class? So, Bailey's a student at UWF here in Pensacola, and this is a class basically on. You still utilize Essentials, right? The book Essentials.
I
No.
don't know. I didn't actually buy it.
Oh. Remember that excerpt you wanted? This is definitely the excerpt right here. This is it. This is the 1 minute.
I
So,
didn't have money for that.
okay. All right. So, tell me what you're learning in this class that's supposed to be on strength and conditioning, right?
Yeah.
Strength and development, sorry.
The only thing I've learned so far, basically as far as periodization goes, is linear periodization.
Okay.
And what I know from that is basically volume starts really high. As the weeks go on, volume goes down, intensity goes up.
Show me what that looks like on the board. Yep.
This is groundbreaking stuff, right?
Yeah. Maybe above or below or somewhere.
So if we're going to talk about, a second ago we talked about what the overall style looks like, focusing on different pieces. Now, whenever we break that down into our actual, say, 3-month parts that we were just talking about, this is where we start to get into actual what volumes and intensities, sets and reps, percentages, what that should look like is what Bailey's showing us here. And so you can see on the left he has our volume,
Down, yep.
and on the bottom he has our intensity.
And then down. Or draw an X. Yeah, and then down. There.
So the line that's coming from the top left to the bottom right is our volume decreasing. The line coming from the bottom left up to our top right is our intensity increasing over time.
Cool. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Bailey.
I'm going to back up real quick. You didn't need the up line, just the down line. You only need the down line because intensity is increasing.
Oh, if we're just talking about periodization over time.
Yeah,
Like
that's what I was
moving
thinking.
into
I was
the
thinking
season.
it's just straight down.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay. Well, we
We'll cut
fixed
that
it.
part out.
Yeah.
That was-
So tell us what this is in your words.
well, if I was looking at volume, I'd be looking at the total sets and reps. The way I look at it is based off of our entire day or maybe the entire week of what we're doing based off of lower body push, lower body pull, upper body push, upper body
Oh, hold
pull.
on, you're getting crazy now. All right, so we talked about what our month should look like, and then now we're talking about what the reps and sets and intensities and volumes should be within those months. Now we talked about the volume decreasing over time as the intensity increases.
Mhm.
What does that look like week to week, as per what you're being taught?
Week to week, you'll probably go up about, what I do is about maybe 5 to 8%, depending on how early on it is in the cycle, as far as intensity goes. And then volume just depends on the movement, really. I think it depends on the movement. Yeah, we weren't really taught anything specific as far as like how much something should go up, go down between week to week.
And CJ being somebody that programs a good bit, every day during the week. So week to week, we know what it's vaguely got to look like. Now, week to week, day to day, what does exercise selection look like?
It depends on the sport, as always, specifically, and how many days a week you're training.
So let's say we're talking about CrossFit.
Okay.
To make that super simple.
Oh,
by
yeah.
the way.
Good Lord.
Well,
Oh,
it
man.
could be.
By the way, anyone who is watching this, CrossFit is by far the hardest thing to program for compared to any sport. I mean, it's very, very difficult. Not saying that I'm a very good programmer or CrossFit programmers are very good in general compared to like our world-renowned strength coaches, but it's just we have to focus on so many more aspects of one sport, including gymnastics, high-level aerobic conditioning, high-level anaerobic ability, weightlifting, and overall capacity, and it's just much different to program for. So for CrossFit off-season, our goals would be basically
Expand our triangle, right?
yeah, right. So we want to traditional periodization says we can only really focus on one of the three and kind of lean one way. Well, CrossFit has really started to push the limits, along with some strength coaches. Ryan really pushes for Louis Simmons being able to break the concept of basically power and strength being developed at the same time, which, again, people in traditional like educational models will refute and they will argue with.
Yeah.
But CrossFit's been going on for 18 years now, but officially like 12 years or so. And we've really been able to show the difference, or show the ability to push pure strength and pure endurance at the same time in the off season. And that's what we're trying to do right now. So the volume is very high. Okay, the intensity overall, the intensity is different than our traditional intensity compared to normal sports. The intensity being more like the WOD or the timed workout, similar to.
I would say it becomes a dual definition CrossFit, which I've always really hated that we have the definition of intensity meaning a load, but then we also use intensity for how hard we're going in a workout.
Right. Yeah.
I really wish we could come up with a secondary definition for that, but I agree.
Yeah, so the intensity right now in the off season for those who aren't getting ready for regionals, the ones who are getting ready for regionals, their intensity is beyond measurable in the sense of like what traditional CrossFit programming is. They are hitting multiple workouts a day. They are strength training very high, and they are pushing some pretty long pieces 1 or 2 days a week. Now, the off season again moves more towards this pure strength, pure endurance, being able to train those equally at the same time, and that pretty much goes against everything you'll learn in school and what the books tell you. So how do they do it? And the answer is, it's not very studied yet, so it's really hard to understand. So to answer Ryan's question, like what do we do right now? Basically, we have 5 days in the week in training for pretty much all CrossFit athletes. They do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday, Saturday. That's our traditional breakdown. We rest Thursday, we rest Sunday. And we will prioritize one day as strength training, whether that's weightlifting specific or powerlifting specific, some form of lower body barbell. And then that's Monday, lower body barbell with auxiliary movements and potentially some form of maybe small conditioning or like high, maybe some sled pushes or something that's kind of low skill, maybe some kettlebell swings or something to that nature. And then Tuesday is probably going to be some form of endurance-based running, either sprint intervals or longer running pieces, mile repeats, something to that effect. And then Wednesday, we'll go back to the barbell, but it'll be upper body push-pull, right? So we try and kind of break it down. And again, every gym is a little bit different. Everyone's programming different right now. Everyone has a different theory on off-season, but
because there's no real CrossFit model to look
not
at.
at all.
You can look at tons of models for programming for football,
right?
But there's virtually none to look at for programming CrossFit. They all seem so broad and vague when you try and look at it.
And everyone has just a little bit different of a theory. But I truly believe that the off-season is for two things in CrossFit. And so that'll be, we assume everyone is basically what we call an open athlete. And their goal is their in-season is going to be from the end of February through March to the beginning of April right now. So that was just our season. So we're now in the off-season.
So to back up a little bit, so day to day, right, you talked about a lot of stuff, which is definitely relevant to this conversation. But I think we can break that down even further to our 4 primary movement patterns, if you want to talk about that, Bailey.
Oh, that. What, lower body push, lower body pull, upper body push, upper body pull?
Right, and what are those? What do those mean?
Lower body push would be your squatting.
So more of a knee-dominant movement?
Yeah, quad dominant.
Yeah.
Then lower body pull would be posterior chain dominant, so hinging, deadlifts, RDLs, kettlebell swings, anything where you're hinging over. Then upper body pull, that would be your back dominant stuff, upper back dominant stuff, pull-ups, rows, and then upper body push, overhead press, push press.
Definitely. And to me,
handstand push-up, CrossFit.
Just kind of looking out at what a lot of other people do, I feel like breaking it down to that simple of a concept is where a lot of CrossFit programmers miss the mark. Obviously, I'm not talking about your top level guys like your CJ Martins or your Ben Bergerons or those guys, but a lot of the local programmers that I see, I think that's where they really miss it, is how basic we can really make it, right? Because it's one thing to say, yeah, okay, we need to do wall balls, we need to do kipping pull-ups, we need to do clean and jerks, we need to do snatches, we need to do squats, let's make sure we do some sled pushes, we need to do some burpees. It's one thing to say you need to do all that, and that's great and important, but at the end of the day, we have to look at how efficiently are we building the 4 primary movement patterns and the combinations of those.
Right.
And I think that's where a lot of guys miss the mark. And I think that's where to risk going into a whole other enormous conversation where a lot of issues arise with CrossFitters, especially your general population fitness people. You know, for instance, I've seen it 100 times in my own gym. We go overhead a couple too many times in a week, and people, you got 5 people that are like, oh man, my shoulders really bother me, and I think that's like I say, at risk of talking about that, I think that's where a lot of programmers are missing the mark on just breaking it down, making it very simple, saying this is our focus pattern for this day, this is our focus secondary pattern. And then let's build on that. Let's look at that and figure out what movements fit into that. Now we can look at our mile-long list of skills we got to build in CrossFit and figure out how those play in here. And hopefully you're crossing those off as you go through every single week, saying, did I hit this? Did I hit this? Did I hit this? And then varying your volumes on each as you're going through that.
Yeah, we program as a group at our gym, Barn Fitness.
Nice plug.
Shameless. We program as a group, and I think that is one thing that we all struggle with as far as having that many bodies looking at a program for a week.
It is tough.
Deciding what we like. Everybody wants to do something, but it may not fit into the workout. Because I know this week
it is tough. It's really easy to just throw a bunch of stuff on there and not really see it as that simple of a thing. Like CJ was talking about, he started talking about all the different movements, and it gets so easy to just list the movements, instead of the actual movement patterns. And, I think at the end of the day, programming is always relatively simple. It's when we have to take that first step out into sports specificity where things start to get complicated, right? If we're talking about sports specificity for baseball, it's pretty simple, right? It's, can you do this effectively? Can you rotate effectively? Can you sprint effectively? It's not too crazy, right? There's a whole other realm of injury prevention, but it's not too crazy. But when you say that with CrossFit, it gets very difficult.
Right.
Yeah.
You mentioned some of the big names. So you're talking about local programmers compared to the big name programmers, and I have a big caveat to that statement that the big name programmers have it the easiest because they program for high level athletes. And what do high level athletes in CrossFit not have to do? Get better.
Right.
They are good. They don't have to get skillful. They don't have to improve their skill. They only have to improve capacity. Yeah. And that makes it hugely different. And that's where the biggest mistake from, I think, a lot of athletes, maybe not programmers, but just athletes that, follow these big programs like What's Rich Doing or CrossFit Krypton or Invictus or CompTrain, they just CrossFit all year.
Yeah.
And for most people, it's, there's nothing wrong with those programs. They get a lot of people really good. But if you have to get better at a specific skill, say chest to bar pull-ups, okay, there's quite a few factors that go into that, right? You have a skill portion of it, of your gymnastics skill. You have a strength portion of it, upper body pulling, grip strength, grip endurance, upper body pulling endurance, upper body pulling strength, the ability to work under fatigue as capacity. Now, if you're really good at chest to bar pull-ups and you want to get better, the only thing you have to do is do them more, right? Or do them in workouts under fatigue and you just build capacity. But if you can't do them, or you only have a couple, then you just doing them in a workout is not going to make you better at them. Absolutely. And that's where the programming gets very difficult.
So I mean, so it's not very hard at all to say that if you are a lower level CrossFitter or a beginning competitive CrossFitter or even like a mid range CrossFitter who, you know, say you're a fringe for regionals, or you're reaching those levels, but you have some big faults, you have some big movements that you struggle with, you probably need to be on some degree of personalized programming.
At least it's some form of periodization, something that's like not class year round, right? And that's like class is good, CrossFit for Fitness is not doing any of the things we're talking about, right? Most of the time, right? For that's the traditional model is this. There's no periodization, there's no rhyme or reason, right? It's
other gyms,
filling,
not this gym.
anyways, we're not talking about that today. So, but that's the way it is, right? It's just, the concept of like, variance always, right? Yeah. Where does it say right here? Routine is the enemy. Okay. Yeah. So, now for your competitive athlete that has holes, they need to work at them. Okay. And for the most part, it's done in the off season, and your joints and your body, it's really hard to hold up working on dynamic skills year round. So that's why I believe that, going back to our triangle, that we can work pure strength, pure endurance, which are low skill based things, pure strict movements, strict pressing, strict pulling, strict squatting, deadlift, strict squatting, which is like no high level weightlifting, right? Not a ton of complexes, just, like we said, the four basic movements, right? And just use them at their most basic level, and then run, bike, row, endurance, push sleds. Yeah. And this is a good time to do that. It gives the dynamic, gives the joints some freedom to relax, to recover, and you can start to get strong. And the intensity is down for CrossFit purposes.
Yeah. So being fresh out of the open, obviously the open exposes a lot of weaknesses that people have. If not potentially all of them that you could have in CrossFit, right? I feel like the open is pretty thorough as far as CrossFit goes.
Dave does a good job, unfortunately.
Yeah, as much of a hard time as people give him, and I'm not always a fan of the structure of the workouts, he does hit a broad range of what you see as far as movements go. But so the open, we pass the open, everybody can see where their weaknesses are. How do we attack going into this next phase? We're talking about those fringe level CrossFitters, right? The early competitive CrossFitters. How would you attack going into this phase now of say fixing those issues?
Yeah. So again, and it's just what I just said. It's the strength portion or endurance, right? So CrossFit doesn't have the luxury to train one piece of the triangle at once. It's just not. There's not enough time in the year. Right, and like there's too many things to focus on. Like we've talked about, you have gymnastics and you have weightlifting and you have high capacity, basically, and then body weight movements, on the ground, or some form of cardiovascular endurance training. So they have to be done somewhat simultaneously for all of them. So depending on what your biggest issues were, right? Say Diane, right? So we had 18.4 was Diane plus heavy deadlifts and handstand walks. Okay. For someone who struggled largely with that, their off season would be primarily a lot of upper body pushing and a lot of lower body pulling. That would be it. Yep. Overhead stability, strength training, overhead.
And I think that's where we have to get. I think that's really great, and I think that's where we have to get as programmers and even fringe CrossFitters, fringe competitive
CrossFitters.
Yeah. I think that's where we have to get to is understanding issues at such a base level like that, right? So, say somebody that struggled on the deadlifts, thinking you have to deadlift every day is not the answer, right?
Just every other.
It'll probably help. But it's not the answer, right? Doing handstand walks every day is not going to fix the problem 100%. We have to break it down to a pattern to where we can develop that in more various ways, right? The three principles of strength and conditioning being overload, progressive overload, and variance. Right. And we have to have the variance aspect in there to be able to build a broader base and create higher potential.
Right. Yeah, and it's all about building the base, and that's where I think a lot of CrossFit athletes just miss the mark, right? Yeah. Whether it's programmers or the athlete themselves, they come in, they have a little bit of an athletic background, and they can do a muscle up, they can they can move the barbell around a little bit. So then instead of like actually coming in and learning the basics, they use their athleticism to push them past this like on-ramping process, and they can build their capacity well, but their movement patterns might not be ideal for, something might be at fault there, right? And they didn't build the basis and create the variance in their early training to set them up for a long career, resilient career.
Yeah, and you talked to kind of keep hinging on variance. You talked about it a few minutes ago about these upper level CrossFitters just needing to increase capacity, and I would disagree in a way that like I just said, I think that doing something in a WOD is not always going to increase capacity. Whereas if we can create some variance in those movements, because there is quite a bit of variance in CrossFit. In competitive CrossFit, there's not a ton of variance. I think you said it in the last podcast, something like 12 movements or...
Yeah, it's a couple movement patterns just broken up different ways.
Right, it's not that much.
Right.
So do you think that there's a potential for seeing more variance in these top-level CrossFitters training to create a higher capacity? Or do you think it's purely hammering those specific movements?
I don't know. It's so interesting, right? So Matt Frazier, who's won the CrossFit Games 2 years in a row, he had some holes early on, right? And they weren't very big, but they were some, right?
Yeah.
And what did he work on the year before he went? He worked on running the whole year. And he won. He was top 5 in every endurance piece workout in 2016.
Yeah.
That was like his primary thing. He went to a local high school and ran track with them all year. And it showed, and he was able to fix a specific gap or issue that he had in his training. Now, for a lot of people, everyone does have something they lack at, and they should train it. But the guys at higher levels, they don't it's the difficulty in programming in CrossFit is like building the skills, because there's so many skills that we have to possess,
Right.
which is like the dynamic. Basically, the gymnastics and the high-level weightlifting, like those are hard skills to build, okay? And that's where the difficulty comes in. But if you do those well, even at a low level, but you do them well, the movement patterns are fine, then you just build capacity. Then your programming can be prioritized a little bit easier. But someone who still has to learn how to efficiently do chest-to-bar pull-ups, or efficiently do muscle-ups, or efficiently do handstand push-ups, or efficiently do 20 snatches for time, their programming is going to be much different than someone who does all those things well already, even if the other person isn't very strong.
I agree, and to kind of collapse on my own point, I do think that with the broad range of CrossFit, it becomes challenging to create variance on each of those patterns to an effective level all the time.
Sure.
So I do agree with that, and I think that's a good statement on that.
How do you build efficiency in something? You don't do it in a workout? You do it in...
No, I don't. I don't believe, and this is, some people will 100% argue with me on this. I don't believe you do it in a workout. I believe you.
I think it depends on skill level.
Right. Well, we're building efficiency, so we're building.
If we're talking about somebody that, can do one strict handstand push-up, they probably don't need to do a lot of handstand push-ups in a WOD unless it's like 2 every minute.
Right. Yeah. Correct. So then, now if someone, so how to build efficiency. So we're looking again at the pieces, or at our high-level movements. So high-level weightlifting, high-level gymnastics, and you look at them from the basics, right? So gymnastics is a great portion. You have to learn how to kip. You have to learn how to control your body on the bar. And then you also have to have the upper body pulling strength to accomplish the movements that you want to do. So you work those separately, right?
Okay.
So you build upper body pulling strength, and you build the ability to move through the basic patterns first.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's like understanding hollow, understanding arch, understanding how to control, how to move yourself through the motion. Same with the handstand push-up. Upper body pushing strength and control upside down, right? So that's a lot of holds, tripod holds, negatives, eccentrics, strict motions, and then you work into kipping patterns.
Yeah. And I think that's a lot of things that you don't see like on social media and all that stuff. You just see these high-level CrossFitters doing workouts all the time, but you don't see the accessory work that they do.
Right.
All the holds, all that stuff that they do outside of just the workouts.
I'll tell you one person that I do appreciate that does talk about that is Alex Smith. We were just talking about him. Is the fact that he does promote, doing accessory work, doing skill building work. Of course he's selling in a program, but he does talk about that. And I think he's one of the few upper level CrossFitters that are openly saying, hey, you got to do this stuff. It's not sexy. It's not cool. You ain't going to enjoy any of it,
right.
But it's super important. And I really appreciate that as a coach that is working with, lower level competitive CrossFitters that, hey, this stuff's really important. Look at this guy's doing it,
Yeah.
Right.
And I think I'm not a CrossFitter, weightlifter, but that is one thing I definitely lack, and I had that same mindset of as far as accessory work goes. I'm like, well, it's not fun. I don't like to do it. And for a long time, I wouldn't do any accessory work if it wasn't in the program because it just wasn't interesting enough for me to do. And I firmly believe that it is what gets you stronger and better at the movements.
Yeah, I think what accessory work does the most, in this, like the not sexy stuff, is it creates the longevity that we all seek truly.
Yep.
We all want to be good at sport. We all want to move heavyweight, run really far, move heavyweight, and then run with it really far. I don't know, whatever we have to do. But the true goal of all of this is, we want to be fit, we want to look good naked, and we want to do it for a really, really long time.
Yep. Absolutely.
So understanding that, it's kind of peered off from our periodization talk, but that's kind of the goal of all of it. And some are able to do it, some don't. So the goal should always be to avoid injury at all costs, and appropriate programming is the way to do it. And what is the appropriate programming? We don't know, and it's a lot of trial and error. Every year it's a little bit different. You'll probably try something new every year, especially in the sport so young as CrossFit. And as long as you're taking care of yourself, listening to your body, it's okay. You'll make it.
So we'll get back onto the periodization. You would not use long-term linear periodization for your CrossFit athletes?
Not in a traditional model, no.
That's what I thought.
I don't. Was that posed as a question? But no, and the main reason is because of how many pieces of the puzzle have to come together for CrossFit.
Yeah,
more
exactly.
pieces than traditional model, like traditional sports. And I don't think traditional periodization allows us to build all of those pieces well.
Now, I will say with that, I think that variance on its own means that we must use not only different exercises or variance on exercise, but we also must vary on the way that we periodize. So I'm a big believer in, for a sport like CrossFit that does require a huge degree of variance, that varying on your your periodization is very important. For something like weightlifting, that's it's a very singular sport. It's just a couple things that we're working on. I prefer more of an undulating style of periodization. That's what I like to stick to. Right. Whereas in programming crossfitting, I think it's I think it's super important that we are seeing different styles of programming. Right. So an undulating style for your strength and your conditioning work, and then for a strength phase, work more of a linear periodization style.
Right.
Right. And then build in some conjugate work where we're throwing in a lot of dynamic effort. We're throwing in strength, or I'm sorry, we're throwing in maximal effort. We're switching every single week versus in blocks.
Yep.
I think that variance in periodization is even important, right? And I think that's how we reach a higher level.
Yeah.
At a quicker rate.
Right? That's the goal. That true undulating is something that no one does in CrossFit. No one does that.
Uncommon.
It's very uncommon.
Really?
Yeah, no one does that. No one desires to, like right now. Like that would include now. Like you would be doing high level like open style workouts in August and September, but no one. It's like following this like normal model of like this off season to preseason, like open prep model that we've kind of developed. The open prep is when you start to see what you're talking about, this like undulating day to day. low days and high days, working some strength, mostly skill and capacity
Yep.
with we call them open style workouts, which is very high intensity.
Well, let's
maximal
define
efforts.
those real quick. So just so that everybody knows, long-term linear periodization, meaning where all of it has to do with volume and intensity. Every single periodization style is just based simply around volume and intensity. Long-term linear, the Western style that we were talking about, we're taking a long period of time. It can be 6 weeks, 12 weeks, well, generally 12 weeks or more. We're going to work on a similar group of movements, and we're going to progress them along volume and intensity. A short-term linear periodization is where we're going to take roughly 6 to 8 weeks, do something very, very similar. It's going to be a lot tougher on the athlete because we are progressing in such a short period of time and demanding more. Undulating, to me, being we're going to take roughly 3 to 4 week blocks, and we're going to progress very, very quickly through volume and intensity. And we're going to progress. And once we get to the end of that 3 to 4 weeks, we're going to restart with similar exercises and movements. And a more a more west side style is going to mean literally every single week you are changing movements, and you're in extremely high degree of variance. It is by far the hardest way to program effectively because very few people know how to do it. So just to kind of break that down, those are the different programming styles. And I agree that I think undulating is very underutilized in CrossFit. But I think it's a lot because of the high demand of the sport. The sport itself is extremely demanding, so demanding more from your athletes in terms of output is challenging.
It is challenging. I agree. That's a good point. I don't understand that. That is a very good point. Bailey? Anything?
Did you talk about where does block periodization fall in? I know we talked about that in my class.
Block's just a variation of your linear periodization.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's basically the same thing. It's really not much different. Unless you
No,
agree?
that's,
It's, There's,
I'd say it's
I just remember that.
semi-undulating, kind of. I mean, it's
I
like...
think it has something.
It's more phasic.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyways, well, we're just rambling now. So
ahead.
I think that's the end of the episode. Thank you guys for listening. I hope we didn't bore you too much on programming, but that is what the podcast is basically about. So hopefully you listen to the whole thing. And we are just a athlete, a coach, and a physio talking nonsense, programming, barbell, fitness, and now we're going to go play some spike ball. All right, guys. See you next time.
See ya.